Boys with aphantasia don't go missing. Tucker watched the driver door to the silver sedan open as he approached the dirt parking lot, his collapsed walking poles dangling from his sleeves as he reached out to shake the nervous-looking girl's hands. "Cindy?" Tucker proposed, dropping his hand when she made no indication of relinquishing her own from the front pockets of her hoodie sweatshirt. "That's right," she breathed. "And you?" "Tucker, the main mod from the paranormal enthusiast thread," he offered her. "You might recognize me as Krypton Tuck." Cindy relaxed a touch but did not step away from the open door of her car, which dinged obnoxiously with the still air. "Where's the rest of the team?" she asked, turning her neck as she analyzed every square inch of the moderately full parking lot. "No one else could make it, I'm afraid." He was still excited to enter the Angeles National Park at dusk, but he certainly didn't want to do it alone. "Oh," she responded doubtfully. "This place is creepier than I thought. I was really hoping for the whole group tonight." "I do understand your reservations, but you truly are in good hands." He indicated the military-grade backpack on his shoulders, which was modded out with a water bladder, a hatchet hanging from one of the straps. He thought the hatchet might scare her off even further, but to his relief, she closed the door behind her and stepped onto the nearest curb to measure herself in front of the entrance to the overgrown woods. There were no signs of playing children or masters and their dogs. It was just the two of them, and Tucker wasn't sure how he was supposed to feel either. There had been over 100 disappearances inside the Angeles National Park, also known as the Forest of Disappearing Children, and a few of those cases had been recorded that past summer. It had quite a history stretching back to the mid-70s, and its legacy was attached most unfortunately to that of a convicted serial killer that had been sentenced to death. Still, the children continued to disappear inside the woods, as late as 17 years old, and always children. This is, of course, what had attracted Tucker and Cindy to the paranormal enthusiast chat room, and there were more than a few enthusiasts right there in the Los Angeles area, so Tucker had offered a meet and greet to put a few faces to names and see what all the fuss was. Now, standing at the trail marker in front of the park's entrance, Tucker was glad he was 26 years old. Much too old to be a child, he could only hope. But after running his eyes down from Cindy's thin beanie cap to her holey jeans, to her scuffed Converse shoes, he had to wonder if she was as safe as him. He didn't know how to venture to ask her age without sounding like a total creep and pushing her further away. He didn't want to be alone, but he thought it was only fair to warn her about what she was getting into. She was a paranormal enthusiast after all. She had to know most of the story, right? "We better get going before it gets too dark," Tucker said. "I know there's a lookout point about a mile, but it's all uphill if you can manage." "I told the group we wouldn't go much farther than that," Tucker explained. "I brought a flashlight," she said, finally freeing a hand to show off the small handheld thing that could barely cast a beam 2 feet in front of her. "I thought the point was to go in after dark to get the whole experience," she continued. Tucker smirked, impressed now. He strapped a headlamp onto his own forehead and fixed the strap. "Yeah, we'll definitely have some time in the dark, but on our way down the hill. It'll be easier that way, and we won't have to spend too much time relying on our flashlights. Trust me, if you haven't been in the woods after dark, it gets really dark and disorienting." Cindy nodded seriously as they strode up the first stretch of path, side by side. Tucker switched on his headlamp to its lowest grade, just so they could feel more comfortable in the sudden shade that had fallen over them in the mixed mesh of redwoods and evergreen trees taking up space on either side of their trail. "I'm glad you know where you're going," Cindy said after an awkward pause that had stretched too long between them. Tucker had been in the process of thinking up a natural way to get her to confess her age, but was relieved to unwind in the break in silence afforded to them both. "Yeah, I've been on this particular trail a few times, always in the morning or afternoon, though, and never alone." "Ever come in here as a kid?" she asked. He nodded without her seeing. "A few times with friends after school. We knew about the stories then, too, of course, but that was all part of the allure." "You never saw anything? Never had a friend disappear?" Tucker wanted to laugh, but stifled it, thinking it would come across as too morbid. He didn't think he'd have to worry too much about that, as this was a girl who had seemed so giddy to ask him with an elevated tone and chin if any of his childhood friends had gone missing without a trace inside an infamously haunted forest. And hadn't her online handle been SlasherGirl666 or something to that effect? "No, I never saw anything strange, so that's why I wanted to come in at night, so maybe we could catch some of those orbs on camera, or with our own eyes. I hear groups have had luck attracting activity, and 2 people at least are better than 1. "What do you think the orbs are?" Cindy asked. She stepped aside, a bit breathless, Tucker noticed, to allow him to form the lead up the first hash-marked trail. "Some say they're the lost children, trying to find their way out of the woods," Tucker explained over his shoulder. He knew that his hatchet must seem intimidating, dangling in front of Cindy's face as she followed suit up the path. "Others think the orbs are alien abductors that have snatched up the poor kids, looking to grab up some more." "You think it may be alien abductions?" he heard her ask behind him. There was a new edge to her voice, one of anxiety. He was at least thankful that he had taken the lead up the trail. It was his main intention to make her feel as safe and protected as possible, something he had developed from a lifetime caring for a younger sister, when they were both latchkey kids looking to fend for themselves after school in an empty house. As jumpy as she had already proved to be, if he had chosen to walk behind her, she would have probably already cut off the trail to slide down the hillside, back to the parking lot, abandoning Tucker to soldier the rest of the way himself. I don't like to speculate. I like evidence. I have a camera. If I see anything, I'll make a record. I'm just glad you have a weapon in case there really is a serial killer in these woods, she said, closer to his back than before. The trail leveled out a bit a few yards later, and they were able to stand shoulder to shoulder again as they walked, marching in the hush for a beat with only the crunching gravel under their shoes to keep their thoughts occupied. The headlight flickered out in the center of Tucker's forehead, and he cursed under his breath. For the first time, they could fully appreciate how murky the air had become with the setting sun. Cindy offered to switch on her keychain flashlight, but Tucker was already plopping his backpack onto the path and digging through its contents. He came back with a good-sized lantern that actually had a built-in TV screen and radio transmitter built into the body. The hand crank on the back told Cindy that it was rechargeable. "Get many TV channels out in the great outdoors?" Cindy asked with a smirk. Tucker smacked the lantern's body with his palm when it didn't turn on right away and pointed a healthy beam out across the nearest gully and at a crop of trees beyond. "No, not really." He was already set to continue up the incline laid out in front of them, but Cindy was still rooted to the side of the trail, staring out across the gully with her arms draped across her chest and each hand clinging tightly to her bony shoulders. "Do you see that?" she suddenly snapped. Tucker jumped at her exclamation, and the high beam on his lantern danced as his head snapped up and around. He must have looked in every direction, probing the trees with his light, before finally centering on the crop of trees across the gully once again. "What? What do you see?" he cried. He narrowed his eyes and stooped down low next to her so he could center his light in the low brush at the base of the trees. She glared down at him with pleading eyes. "You're telling me you don't see those?" "See what?" he begged. "Something in the trees?" "No, it's the trees themselves. They're upside down. Don't you see the roots sticking up in the air?" Now he was studying her face, the beam still trained on the far-off clearing. Upside down trees? He looked again but only saw the usual backdrop of solid green evergreens, motionless in the calm night. She continued to stare off into space with wide eyes, sneering fearfully now. "And they're carved to look like devils, like totem poles, and they're painted with red or blood." "You're screwing with me now," Tucker said, but she threw him a distasteful look, already booking it down the path again. Whoa, wait, if you're going back, let me go with you," he called after her. She was quicker than he thought, scurrying and throwing the gravel in a flurry of dust and spraying rocks. "I don't need help from you. Listen, stop for a moment. My camera has a strong zoom. We can look at the trees up close if you want to. I'm sorry, my eyes aren't so good in the dark. Please wait." He was surprised when she froze in her tracks, leaning against a boulder and hyperventilating. He was quick to whip out a sweating water bottle from his pack, and she gratefully drank from it, her hand on her chest. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm sorry," she replied. "I don't mean to scare you, but I have hyperphantasia." "What phantasia?" Instead of being offended, she sighed. "I have a very active imagination. The things I see in my mind are so real sometimes. I think I might have been projecting those trees." "Like a hallucination?" "Uh-huh. I've been like this since I was 8. About 10 years ago." 18, Tucker thought to himself. 1 year older than the oldest child that had gone missing in the woods. "When I was a girl, I'd sometimes see red wolves in my living room, and I always thought they were protecting me somehow. They never attacked me." "Trippy," Tucker said. "Do you see them anymore?" "Sometimes," she answered quietly, without looking up from her sneakers. He wondered if she was afraid of looking up and seeing more of those totem poles lining the path. "Those trees were some of the scariest I've seen in a while, that's all. If he really didn't see them, I can't help but feel like I'm losing it." "That's such an interesting condition. I've never been able to picture anything in my head. I hardly ever dream, or even have an inner monologue." "You sound like you have aphantasia then," she said casually. "Huh. I didn't realize there was a name for it," Tucker said to himself. "I'm good to continue on if—" But Cindy was cut off by a strange beep directly over their heads. They both exchanged a glance and seemed to be relieved that it hadn't been another hallucination. Tucker trained his beam on the top of the nearest redwood and saw a red light blink back at them from one of the tangle of branches. His first thought was that they were indeed encountering one of the famous orb lights, but the beep came again, fainter this time, and they could be sure it was from a piece of equipment fixed to the tree. In fact, it looked like a small satellite dish of some kind, and now that they had spotted it with their ears tuned toward the source, it seemed to emit a buzzing, humming noise, clearly active in transmitting something. If it hadn't been for the beep, they would have easily overlooked it, as it was painted in camouflage colors of brown and green. "What is that?" Cindy questioned. "I don't The milky gray TV screen built into the lantern flickered on with hissing static, and they both watched wide-eyed as images of children developed on the glass, all of them black-eyed, ashen-faced, and emotionless. What they were seeing was an aerial view of their very path, seemingly projected from the dish in the tree, and all around them were those black-eyed children, dressed in parkas, gym shorts, swimming trunks, and soiled tank tops. They were surrounding them, stepping out of the trees without making a noise, and staring at the two of them as they closed in. They weren't in a hurry, though, and they didn't seem to regard each other at all, sometimes bumping shoulders or tripping carelessly over roots in the ground without notice. They had their eyes set on the two of them, and them only. Tucker looked up from the screen but did not see anyone on the path. Cindy, however, was screaming and scrambling up the boulders behind him, reaching blindly for the lowest hanging branches to the oak tree. She dodged and ducked away from something unseen as she attempted to climb the tree, but the branches broke off in her hands and she was sliding backward into Tucker's arms. He caught her, but she fought him, knocking the lantern to the ground and scattering the light into the forest. She elbowed him, and he fell back against his pack, watching as she sprinted off the path and into the gully she would have avoided with her life only minutes ago. As he crawled toward the lantern, calling Cindy's name, he thought he saw her disappear into thin air, halfway across the clearing, the whites of her sneakers there 1 second and gone the next. He was too late in regaining control of the flashlight and shining his worthless signal into the ditch on the other side of the path. She was gone. Simply gone. He could even see the groove in the tall grass that she had carved in her escape, now completely devoid of woman or animal. The TV screen on his lantern was dead again, and he was at least thankful for that. He called her name again and listened intently after each bellow into the trees. After what seemed like his 7th call, he thought he heard something rustle in the brush behind him, too close for comfort. He searched every square inch of the path, but did not see any children or sign of their passage through the grass or footsteps in the dirt. He did see more of those satellite dishes, though, situated in about every 3rd tree. That buzzing filled his skull for the 2nd time, and he couldn't help but wonder what horrible images they were attempting to project into his head, and what horror Cindy must have seen after opening her susceptible mind to their frequencies. Thank God he had aphantasia, he thought to himself, and his hallucinations would remain exactly that, at least for the moment. That was when he decided it was time to go, but he shone one last beam into the clearing and thought he saw something red and furry skulking in the dead grass around the spot where Cindy had disappeared. The last thing he saw before he was sprinting down the path back toward the parking lot was the ginger-red tail of a fox cutting through the weeds and vegetation and whipping out of sight. As he huffed and cried on his mad sprint to his car, he heard the sorrowful howl of the wolves, mourning the loss of their lifelong protege.